When did you first start exhibiting behaviors that you now know are ADHD?
I believe it was around kindergarten. I had a fantastic teacher who was super understanding. And she's like, hey, talking to my mom and dad, your kid is very distracting in class.
Distracting or distracted?
Distracting and distracted. I was a problem for students around me and for myself. And so they would just put me in a corner or put me by myself and be like, okay, don't talk to anybody. Don't interact with people until it's time.
Always, really, but nobody was worried because I was a really gifted student, to the point where when I first sought a diagnosis, I went to our pediatrician and he was like, okay, how does she do in school? And I was like, well, she gets straight A's, she's a gifted student. And he was like, she can't have ADHD. And that was the thinking at the time, and it's still the thinking. But the truth is, I always exhibited symptoms.
Can you explain how your day might differ from someone who doesn't have ADHD?
So when I wake up in the morning, I am trying to think about everything that I need to do for the next couple of days and then attempt to do it all at once. And generally what ends up happening is it gets overwhelming, and then I will kind of not really do anything with my day because I'm trying to do too much.
So it's kind of like you can't compartmentalize, like, this is something that I could do this hour, this is something I can do this hour.
Yeah.
You think of everything you have to do, and then you can't stop thinking about how you have to do all of it at once.
Or if there's like a specific thing that's distracting you and you go down that rabbit hole, because you can either be focused on many things or you can be hyper-focused on one thing, which may not be the most productive thing.
Can you recall any big moments in your life that were clearly shaped by having ADHD?
I went to go get a job once, like a proper office job selling copiers. I was really excited because they loved me and they were so cool, and I am such an office supply nerd, as a lot of people with ADHD are, because we're constantly trying to organize ourselves. And they offered me the position, and they were clearing out a desk for me, and they ran a background check, and I was like, I'm fine. Like, I was never an external troublemaker. All my issues were internal for the most part. So I was like, that's great. And they were like, well, no. And I was like, wait, what? And they were like, did you know your license is suspended? Your driver's license? And I was like, no, I did not. It turned out the reason why my driver's license was suspended was because I had a broken taillight and I got a fix-it ticket. So I went and fixed it. But I forgot a step. I forgot the step of showing them that I had fixed it. And so they didn't know I fixed it. I didn't get that resolved. I wasn't opening my mail because it was under a pile of a lot of other mail. And I explained it to them and I was like, okay, can we get this sorted out? And they're like, we wish we could, but you'd be driving a company car. We have a policy that if your license was suspended for any reason, you can't drive a company car. I'm so sorry. And I was heartbroken. But now it makes sense, why all of that happened, and why I got so many parking tickets, and why I got towed so many times, and why I jumped into relationships that weren't good for me and ended up getting divorced, why I chased so many careers that I couldn't actually make progress in any of them. This all makes sense now. I've read enough research and I understand enough now that all of it makes sense. Before I could just blame myself and feel like I was just a fuck up. And yeah, I got distracted and yeah, I took medication, but everything else was just me failing as a person, like failing to be a proper human being, I guess. And now it all makes sense.
Before we continue learning about the world of ADHD,
it was really hard for me when I realized at 31 that I was no longer the person who had so much potential. I was the person who hadn't reached it.
I want to reiterate that these videos aren't intended to diagnose any condition or disorder, and I encourage anyone who feels like they may relate to any diagnosis of the guests in these videos to do some additional research and consider a proper diagnosis from a licensed professional. I also hope that topics like this one can help remind us all that due to personal circumstances, backgrounds, and experiences, each individual's world can be just vastly different from our own. To see other topics I've covered, like this one including borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, and dissociative identity disorder, for example, I'll include a link up in this corner. Now back to the world of ADHD. Are there any potentially dangerous aspects to having ADHD?
Self-control is a big part of it. It is easier to enable certain issues such as drug use or addiction or compulsive shopping.
Is there anything that helps ease your ADHD when you're experiencing symptoms that you don't want to experience?
I would get hyperactive and I remember just being told to go run outside. Just go take a run around the cul-de-sac.
Just go outside, move your body.
If my parents could get me outside doing something focused in my body, I could kind of bring myself back to the ground rather than just being stuck up here.
Are there extended periods of time where you completely forget that you have ADHD, or is it something that's kind of always there?
I have extended periods of time where I just forget everything and feel like I'm a little alien rat child wandering around a corporeal plane.
Right.
I don't know if that's ADHD or what.
I don't know if you ever forget it. I mean, for me, it's always been something that's been with me, so it's just how I know the world. It's not as much like, do I forget, as much as it is, can I catch myself doing what I would do with ADHD?
So therefore, it's kind of always there. You're always
Thinking.
You're always trying to filter yourself a little bit through the lens of, oh, I have ADHD. I better reel this in.
Yep.
Do you know if ADHD is something that you develop or something that you're born with?
ADHD is highly genetic, like highly. If you have ADHD, it's very likely that one of your parents had undiagnosed ADHD, and that's a lot of how people find out. There are a lot of adults with ADHD that don't realize that's what they have.
And then their kids get diagnosed, and then they start thinking.
I also have a theory that a lot of the people who are like, ADHD doesn't exist, like that's not a thing, or everybody has ADHD, or like that's just being normal. I'm like, have you gotten checked out? Like,
yeah.
A lot of people with ADHD don't know they have ADHD because they just think they're lazy or dumb or don't care or aren't trying hard enough or any number of other things. When they find out, there's often that, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
How do you feel about the idea that many traits associated with ADHD are advantages in some way? I mean, even now it could be like, oh, you're more creative, or back throughout history, our ancestors, those with ADHD were much more likely to notice dangerous things in the distance, to see the shiny, ripe fruit behind the tree. And there's actually some studies that were done, and they tested different people who were part of this nomadic tribe, and they were able to see that those with ADHD symptoms were actually better hunter-gatherers.
Oh, 100%. I mean, for me, in my job, it pays off handsomely because our job is forgetting the cameras in front of us and focusing on the acting, focusing on the scene, focusing on the world, putting ourselves in a different place than our physical body is. And because of my ADHD, I can tune that out, no problem.
You thrive on it, in fact.
I play characters that don't have ADHD. I play characters that can stand still for hours at a time. And so it's a fun challenge to slow down and sit still and speak methodically and purposefully, because it's a game. It's a game to mirror what I've grown up watching, but not have to be that always like I thought I did when I was a kid.